Here we are in lovely Las Vegas, Nevada, at the Microsoft Mix 2009 conference in the Venetian, as you can tell from the lovely gold backdrop that we have. And we've got a guest with ourselves. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I would. Hi, I'm Patric McElroy. I'm the Group Program Manager of the SQL Data Services team within the SQL Services team at Microsoft.
We've been talking about Azure and cloud computing and things like that. And so I think people know what SQL Server is, and that's databases are covered,
right,
as it were.
Right, and the whole data platform.
Exactly.
Not just the relational database, but the BI.
That's right. And you guys have Project Historia under, or is that? Yeah.
No, it's in the same division. Yeah, ADO.NET Data Services.
Yeah.
You can't use the code name.
Of course not. How is SQL Server moving into Azure, into the cloud? Like what?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the SQL Data Services is the first of a series of steps where we'll take key parts of that SQL data platform and we'll extend it to both include what it does now, of course, desktop and server, and mobile. We'll extend it into the cloud.
Is there going to be sort of a relational, like typical database-like way of using it, or is it going to be a REST sort of thing? Or
yeah,
I mean, what are the interfaces playing out to be? And I ask that because as developers move to the cloud, there seems to be typically it seems like you have to go through a technological shift.
Well, it's true, and there are clearly some differences in building services-based applications, and that will impact on the applications that you build. But obviously, there's value in keeping those differences to an absolute minimum.
Right.
And so one of the things we're doing, in fact, we announced last week, and we're reinforcing and giving some detail here at Mix on is we are going to take SQL Data Services, and we're actually going to expose the relational database capability that we have as a service, but using the TDS, the Tabular Data Stream Protocol,
right,
and the T-SQL query language, expressly to get a high degree of symmetry between the on-premise experience that you have with SQL Server and the rest of the SQL data platform, and now this cloud service that's built on the same technology foundation.
So backing up a little bit to usage of things, you know, while there's sort of like legacy usage patterns that you want to definitely keep and enable.
Sure.
Like aside from, I mean, obviously if you're deploying an application in the cloud, you need to have a data store of some sort.
That's right.
But are there things about being in Azure, the cloud, that like give you something different that you didn't have previously?
There certainly are. So the core relational model and the relational query capabilities that you have as part of the platform are the part that's the symmetry. We think that there's a number of we call them services goodnesses,
right,
but good things that come from being able to deliver this as a service. Things like self-service provisioning, friction-free provisioning.
And will this prevent people having to wait like 10 weeks for the DBA to create a column and a table?
Exactly, and then 4 weeks before that to actually provision the machine to go put the database
right,
on, to then wait the 10 weeks to have the DBA create a column.
Right.
But yeah, just you can go through a very quick provisioning process, and without having to stand up hardware or install or do anything like that, you can get a database to build departmental and web workload apps on. And there are other that are a little bit more subtle potentially, but the fact that we will redundantly store the data and we'll do all that behind the scenes for you means that even with that very simple provisioning experience, right, you'll get automatic fault tolerance and high availability out of the service.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I remember one of the surprises that people have used cloud things for, like whether it was EC2 or Amazon Cloud, is people backing up their database and just
right,
having like somewhere else to back their database up to, right, which I always think when it comes to cloud computing that essentially storage is one of the low-hanging fruits, if you will, and everything that comes out of that.
The infrastructure that we've built, again, based on that SQL Server technology foundation, but also the fault-tolerant and the self-healing and the automatic fabric that we have around that SQL Server foundation. And then the way the service will use that foundation will give customers that high availability and that fault tolerance simply by virtue of creating a database. So really without any rocket science at all.
Right.
They get something that has heretofore been only available through someone.
To the rocket scientists.
Exactly. Another key workload that we're targeting is the ISV workload. And as it turns out, it's particularly well suited for an ISV that's building an application that will scale horizontally.
Sure.
So as with any kind of cloud platform or any kind of cloud technology, there's scaling is one of the benefits of it. And with SDS, and particularly for, again, a sort of horizontally scaled out app, the ability to create those well, think of them as partitions, but they'll really be databases.
Right.
To scale your app, particularly if it makes sense, you create a database per customer that you have for your app, is a very natural data model that you get. The interesting subtle point there is that once you do that, the fact that we're running on thousands of servers means that as you issue a query and you issue them against multiple databases, you now can get great benefit from that because your query now runs in parallel on dedicated processors, and you can process an amazing amount of data in parallel very, very quickly. And it's a very natural thing that you get because you've built your app in a way that's partitionable.
It's sort of bringing enterprise-grade sort of grid, benefits down to just anyone who might want to use it.
Yeah, and doing so in a very highly parallelized infrastructure.
Right.
So rather than scaling up the machine and buying a 64 processor with 12 terabytes of RAM, you're just able to run this thing across a broad set of commodity blades. But the throughput for queries can be just amazing.
This is a little out of left field, but looking at the tooling that you've done for Azure, are there benefits that you're pulling back into on-premise SQL Server installs?
Sure. The reason why we started with the SQL Server Technology Foundation is because it's a fantastic foundation. But the reason why we're thinking about this as part of extending the platform is because there's a lot of benefits kind of both ways.
This is a little out of left field, but looking at the tooling that you've done for Azure, are there benefits that you're pulling back into on-premise SQL Server installs?
Sure. The reason why we started with the SQL Server Technology Foundation is because it's a fantastic foundation. But the reason why we're thinking about this as part of extending the platform is because there's a lot of benefits kind of both ways.
Right.
The move to TDS and T-SQL has also allowed us to kind of open up to customers just the amazing ecosystem of tools, both management as well as development tools that exist today for SQL Server.
Right.
So for example, a developer who's familiar with Visual Studio, familiar with the SQL Server tools that are in Visual Studio, can continue to use those as they build out applications that they'll deliver to as a service.
Right.
At a point where they're ready to deploy, rather than deploying to a SQL Server in your corporate LAN environment, you'll point that script to an endpoint in SDS, and you'll deploy in the same way, but you've spent all of your time in the rich tool set, in the rich ecosystem that you have in an on-premise environment, in a local development environment.
That makes
so it's
sense.
great synergy. Of course, there will be, particularly in our V1, it won't be 100% compatible. But we think for the vast majority of apps, 80% of apps, and certainly even 90–95% of the departmental and web workload apps, that the compatibility that we'll be able to deliver in V1 will mean they'll literally just point their deployment script at the endpoint, they'll deploy it, and their app will run.
Another aspect that I'm interested in that you touched on briefly is I guess you would call it the DBA aspects of dealing with that. And traditionally, like I was kind of cruelly joking about earlier, the DBA is sort of a center of power and control in the enterprise. And so on the one hand, the question is, for existing DBAs, how can they maintain that nice position they have as things move to the cloud? But then on the other hand, how does the role of the DBA does it get affected by just simply moving, having SQL Server beyond the firewall?
I think it will be impacted. And I think certainly the feedback that we've gotten from customers is that it will be a way for the DBAs and the IT staffs, corporate IT, to be able to provide a richer set of capabilities back to their businesses.
Right.
And so it was really actually kind of interesting that we've been doing this now since the last mix. So a year ago was when we first announced the service. And over time, we've been engaging, of course, with DBAs as well as data programmers. And the early feedback from DBAs was one of nervousness, like, what's happening to me, and what am I going to do now in this world? And over time, the feedback from them, and as they learn more about the system, this becomes another tool that they have to deliver capabilities to their businesses.
Right.
And in fact, again, just as we were talking about before with some of the query performance, Corp IT will actually find that there's some hidden benefits in here that may not be apparent. A great example is right now a lot of our customers will talk to us about, they have this database sprawl effect. whether it be SQL Express or MySQL or something. It's databases will spring up like weeds in departments.
Yeah, and not to mention many different versions of them.
In many different versions, and particularly in the day and age in which we live around corporate compliance, there's some CX type, CXO officer who has to sign off that all the policies have been applied to all the data, which they sort of get nervous whenever they have to sign that. If you fast forward and say, well, rather than building that under somebody's desk on a piece of used hardware, if you could just provision that in the cloud, not only do you get that self-provisioning we talked about, but now you get compliance, you get the ability to discover without getting in the way of somebody who needs to go build an app for their business.
Right.
Central IT can go discover that, can make sure policies are enforced appropriately on that, and really now can get the insight that they need in order to do the corporate compliance they have.
That gets at another thing that I was curious about, especially when it comes to compliance and regulations and everything, and your data and therefore the databases are often at the heart of that.
Right.
Things
Right.
residing.
Absolutely.
And of course the idea of Azure or any cloud computing thing is that you'll have many different data centers spread out everywhere. What can we expect from the SQL Server SDS area of Azure as far as I need this data to be in Germany or I need this to be in China? I mean, how does that sort of play out?
Obviously, Microsoft's investment in data centers around the world is a great investment that will live on and will live in those data centers, and that'll be great for customers. The Windows Azure folks, in fact, at the conference are announcing an ability to name the geographic location that you'll do your deployment in, and we expect to follow suit with that. So just as you can say, my compute is going to go in the Pacific Northwest somewhere, in whatever data center that maps to, you'll be able to say the same thing about your database in SDS. And then you can, by doing that, control the fact that you want your compute near your data. Those two things will communicate over a pretty fat pipe in the data center, and you'll get the performance you need, but you'll be able to kind of control where that lands.
So while we have you here, it's a little bit off topic, but because I've closely followed the team and the project for a few years now, can you give us an update of as I still like to affectionately call it, Project Astoria? Like what's going on with that?
Sure. ADO.NET Data Services.
Yes.
Okay. So ADO.NET Data Services is the framework piece that will allow you to provide an entity model and an APP and REST-based interface on top of relational data. We're continuing, obviously, to invest in that and ship that as part of the .NET framework. That turns out to marry very nicely with the relational model that we have.
Exactly.
Given that the way people currently consume that technology on-premise is to do exactly that is to take that framework, do the development work that you need to fill out that framework, do the data mapping that you need, but then put that on top of a relational data model in a relational database, SQL Server. That will fit very, very naturally in the new SDS and in the new world, where that is the Astoria piece, the ADO.NET Data Services piece, will be deployed into Azure Compute. Your database will live in SDS, and it will work great in that environment as well. It can be a fantastic model, and another key thing that we're focused on is, of course, the Brett developer.
Right.
And it turns out, again, something sort of potentially counterintuitive, but supporting TDS and the T-SQL interface, all of the client-side libraries that exist that live on that same foundation, ODBC, and then in turn all of the open source client libraries will work very nicely in that. But the ADO.NET Data Services is a great investment there as well. About if you need to access your data through REST, Atom Pub, when we do it on an entity base, it's a fantastic technology.
Well, great. Well, thanks for spending all this time to talk with us.
Quite welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.